So low turnout. It was the big story. I was just talking to Professor Hoffman that in 2001 and 2005 that were competitive elections, and also in 1993, the turnout increased by 5 to 10 percentage points in the runoff. And so we would expect maybe some of the same thing. So at least 26, 27% turnout, I would hope. So that was the big story. In addition, the second big story was Loyola Marymount University students, who are all here, were out there conducting an exit poll. And thank you all of those of you who participated. And we collected 730 surveys and 25 randomly selected precincts. And we, of course, asked who they voted for, mayor, city attorney, Measure A, et cetera. And we have some of those results. So let's just take a look at quickly at the top lines. And this is actually a survey we did back in February. We called it the LA riots, 20 years after the riots. In that survey, we still thought maybe Sev Yaroslavsky would run, and Austin Butner. And this were the results then. And you could see that at that time, Wendy Greuel and Eric Garcetti were way up there as well. And they maintained that consistent lead. But Sev, I think, had 19%. He was the one down there, even though he had not announced. And this was 1,600 individuals who were surveyed by phone. Next. In 2012, during the presidential election, we actually interviewed 4,000 City of LA voters as they left the polls, the largest exit poll per capita ever conducted in the history of American politics. And in that poll, we saw that Eric would receive 36% and Wendy 32%. And then we also saw Jan with 15% and Kevin with only 9%. And I think he almost doubled that that percentage point in the final results. Okay, next. This is the survey. 33 for Eric Garcetti, 28% for Wendy. We have 18% for Kevin, and Jan had 17%, and then Emmanuel Pleitez 3%. So we're a little bit off, 1 or 2% on some of them, but we're within our error of margin on all the numbers. So you guys did a great job collecting data and processing that data. I mean, this is awesome results. Now let's see so take a look at those. Go back for a second. So these are from our exit poll. Look at the numbers very quickly, then we're going to show you the actual results. Actual results. You can see how close our exit poll was. Okay? All right. And next. All right. We're going to show you a couple of clips from some of the campaigns that we'll have some of our guests comment on, but just to give you a sense of what was attempting to be communicated.
Identifying problems is easy. Solving them is hard. My district is #1 in job growth in Los Angeles. We worked hard to revitalize neighborhoods and to create jobs. I led in cutting business taxes and on pension reform. It was tough, but right. Now let's do the basics better, like answering phones, filling potholes, and picking up trash. Because doing the basics right makes life better for families and makes growth possible.
Eric Garcetti for mayor. Practical problem solver. Proven results.
Every part of LA deserves a better city government. I'm Wendy Greuel, and as city controller, I found $160 million in waste and fraud. Your tax dollars squandered. As mayor, I can stop the waste because I know where it is, and I'll use the savings for job creation, better schools, and faster emergency response in every part of our city. We need a mayor for all of LA, so no one is left behind and no one is forgotten.
As mayor of Los Angeles, I get not only showing where we can find those money and where the bodies are buried, where the bodies are buried.
Meet Eric Garcetti and Wendy Greuel, career politicians running for mayor of Los Angeles. Together, they've been doing the dirty work in City Hall for over 22 years. Most of their work has been done outside of the public eye, behind closed doors, away from watchful eyes. Corruption is the way of life in City Hall, making LA one of the most corrupt regions in America. How'd they do it? Take the special Parking Revenue Fund, buried. Or the Water Main and Fire Hydrant Repair Fund, gone. And the Sidewalk Repair Fund? You guessed it, 6 feet deep. Where'd the money go? Pay raises, redecorated offices, union pensions, city employees' salary increases, and handouts to special interests, not to mention their own $200,000 salaries. Their hard work has paid off, with millions of dollars in contributions from special interests who benefited from their dirty work. When Wendy Greuel says that she knows where the bodies are buried, believe her, because she and Eric Garcetti are the ones that buried them.
Okay, I came here in 1974 from Ohio to go to a Rose Bowl game, and I was thrilled to be here on January the 1st. It was sunny, it was beautiful, the people were diverse, and I was so taken with this city that I immediately applied for a transfer to the University of Southern California, and I've never looked back. I've been fortunate to have 3 great mayors in my life. The first 2 mayors in my life were my own parents. My father was elected mayor in the town where I was raised on the east side of Cleveland, and then my mother was elected some 20 years after that. Everything I learned about taking care of a community, I learned from my parents on how to treat people and how to lift communities up and how to organize and how to make sure that everyone was treated fairly. And the third mayor, the most influential mayor, has been Mayor Bradley. All that I've been able to accomplish the last 12 years, he built the foundation for. This city has been good to me, and it's my turn to give back.
There's no other campaign that's reaching out to these underrepresented neighborhoods.
My background is public sector and private sector, and I grew up in the neighborhood. I grew up in the east side, born in South LA, and that's why I'm walking the streets. No other candidates actually walking the streets this way.
It's very nice to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you, I appreciate it.
It's very unusual.
Voters are going to get a choice. They're going to be able to make their own choice in an educated fashion about all the mayoral candidates.
When I'm in the mayor's office, I'm going to make sure that we have specific plans for every region. Let's get out of the power struggle. It's not about I take over what or who runs what. It's about the kids. It's about the future of the city. It's about the economy. It's about job creation.
He has such a wealth of experience for somebody who's even, twice his age.
Somebody who knows their community, cares about their community, and really wants to represent them.
We're out walking the streets 4 or 5 hours a day, on the phones, from the morning until night. We're reaching out to the community.
Constantly outreaching to our voters on, a personal basis.
I'm not, the chosen one by the politicians. I'm not the guy that, has all the interest groups behind it. But I got a lot of energy. I got a lot of good people around me, a lot of smart people. And, at the end of the day, it's about people, right? It's about engaging real people.
Every individual that we contact feels, special. And feels like, what, I'm being listened to, I'm being heard, and I'll receive representation.
Okay, here's our demographics in terms of who voted in this election. So of all the voters, 22.7% were Latino, 55% were white, 12.4% African American, and 6.8% Asian. And then if you go quickly over to the religion part, we do have Jewish is 11%, and that comes from the white category. Although we think that we may be underestimating that, and we've double-checked it several times, but that's what our survey has. In terms of tenure of LA, it means how long did the people live in LA of the voters, and look at that, 82% of voters lived in Los Angeles longer than 20 years. So you can see that. The gender was pretty well split, a few more females than males. In terms of Party affiliation, 68% were Democrat, 20% Republican, and this is self-identified on there. So some of this, we all know, for instance, that only 16% of registered voters in the city of LA are Republican, but we certainly, the decline to state and others is much higher than 11%. But on the survey, people who are declined to state ended up marking off Democrat, probably, or Republican, okay? Then place of origin, close to 19% of our voters were foreign born, meaning that they became citizens, registered, and are now voting. Next. And of course, this is the results that we have, and again, we switched the places, obviously, with Kevin James and Jan Perry, but we're very, very close to the actual results, okay? And then this is by ethnicity. Eric Garcetti got 49% of the Latino vote. The white vote was very evenly split between the two candidates. Jan Perry obviously got the African American vote, and Eric Garcetti got a plurality of the Asian vote. Okay. And then this is for city attorney, and we're a little bit off on this. We have Mike Fuhrer at 46%, but the actual results had him at 44%. And then we have Carmen Trutanich at 31.5, and the actual results have him at 30.2, but still close enough within our error margin. And then LA City Controller, we have, Ron, if you can move it up, because let's see how we can. Yeah, so Galperin, I mean, this is where we were off the most. We have Denisine at 42%, when in reality, I think he only got 37%. And then Galperin at 37%, but he was actually got at 37, actually beat him, which was one of the surprises of the election. There was some even discussion before the election happened that Denisine might even get 50%. He didn't get close to that, actually finished second. One of the things we've noticed in exit polls, and this is about the 7th exit poll that we've done, we are 99.9% accurate on the first question that we ask. As we go down the ballot, the accuracy starts to wane. People sometimes don't remember what they did by the time they get to the 3rd or 4th. And so, but they do remember who they voted for president, they remember who they voted for mayor, but they have a more difficult time remembering who they voted for. And so that the accuracy declines as you go down the ballot. Next. And Proposition A, we had 57% no, 42% yes, but Harvey Englander actually did a little bit better job. He got, it was 44 or 45% yes, 55% no. So we were off by 2.5 points there. And next. Okay, and that is it. So what I'm going to do now is invite our guest up here, and I'll introduce them, and we'll get going with our discussion, contextualizing the results. What happened on March 5th and why? Welcome to Loyola Marymount University. I'm Professor and Director Fernando Guerra of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. This is a week after the mayoral election of March 5th, and we have with us several of the campaign managers who ran those mayoral elections. I'm actually going to allow them to introduce themselves, talk about which race they ran, if they ran any other races this last election cycle, and just a little bit of quick history of other campaigns that they've run and how they got into this business. And we'll just take less than 1 minute per introduction, and I'm going to start with Jeff, an LMU alum.
Jeff Corless, a proud graduate of Loyola Marymount University, 2003 College of Business. I'm excited to be here. We had a spirited campaign. I was campaign manager for Kevin James, who unfortunately did not make the runoff, but finished in a strong third place, and we'll talk about that tonight, I'm sure, about why. I'm excited to be here 10 years after graduating, and I'm excited that you guys are all engaged and interested to find out what's going on right here in your own community, because everything that goes on in the mayor's office and in Los Angeles city government affects this college campus and what you will be able to do when you graduate from it. I'm a political consultant. I've been a campaign manager for about 12 years now. I have a firm based out of Orange County, and we have clients across the country. And it's an exciting time in politics, and look forward to our discussion tonight.
Hey, Jeff, did you run any other campaigns during this cycle in the city of LA?
No, we were totally focused on the James campaign. We did have a candidate who was elected vice chairman of the California Republican Party, which I may share with a little bit with you tonight, because I think impacts the future of politics for Republicans in Los Angeles and the state of California.
Okay. Harvey?
Harvey Englander, UCLA 72. Been involved in political campaigns since 1968. I ran the Yes on Proposition A campaign that obviously voted no. At least 55% voted no. Our firm, Englander, Knabe & Allen, has elected almost 400 people in various offices around the country over the years. We do public affairs, government relations, and lobbying, and Proposition A was the only campaign that we worked on in the city of Los Angeles in this election.
Anita?
My name is Anita Dharapuram. I'm actually very new to the campaign world. I've been a volunteer with OFA over the years, and
tell them what OFA is.
Well, it was Obama for America, and now it's Organizing for America. And I had joined the Pleitez campaign. We campaigned with Emmanuel Pleitez for LA mayor.
Good evening, John Shallman, political consultant. Worked on a lot of stuff this last election cycle. I absolutely want to talk about the most important campaign, which is Mike Bonin for City Council, which we were very happy and pleased with getting 61% of the vote. That's about knowing your audience, by the way. We handled Wendy Greuel's campaign for mayor, Mike Fuhr's campaign for city attorney, Gil Cedillo's campaign for city council, and of course Mike Bonin's campaign. We also handled a school board race for Steve Zimmer, who was successful in a fourth school board district, and we did an independent expenditure campaign for Curran Price, who's now in a runoff in the 9th council district. I've been doing campaign consulting for about 25 years, everything from presidential, Senate, congressional, local. Love local. It's very exciting, and happy to be here. Thank you.
So, hey, John, so when you interviewed with Mike Bonin to be his consultant, how did you convince him to hire you, given that you were running all these other races at the same time?
Well, the good news is the team that I have working for me, several of them are right here, right now, but there's many others. They're way better than I am, and so Mike was able to get the benefit of having some really great team members of Shallman Communications, and of course, obviously a lot of my time. So the result was good. We're happy.
Eric?
Eric Hacopian and I had two campaigns this cycle, Jan Perry's and Matt Szabo's, so it wasn't the happiest of Tuesday nights, but
Matt Szabo was running for the 13th.
City 13.
And did not make the runoff.
Didn't make the runoff. I've been involved in politics since 1988 when I started as a young activist for Ralph Nader. I ran fundraising canvases for many years and then started working in campaigns. I started my own firm in 1997, and since then I've done campaigns in pretty much all levels of politics, from working presidential campaigns to local campaigns, but mostly locals, and mostly in the state of California.
Bill?
I'm Bill Carrick. I'm a media consultant, and I was the consultant for Eric Garcetti's campaign for mayor, and worked on obviously the media and strategy. This is my 5th LA mayor's race. Worked for Dick Reardon, Jim Hahn, and now Eric Garcetti. And this was the only campaign I did this cycle.
Okay. Jeff, okay, when you start thinking about your strategy and the path to victory, given everybody, well, not everybody, but many knew that he was a Republican, and we've seen the data. Only 16% of registered voters are Republican in the city of LA. About 20% of the turnout's going to be Republican. So you want that base, but you have to expand. So did you really think you were going to win?
Certainly it was an uphill battle from the start, but Kevin was willing to climb that hill, and he's a different kind of Republican candidate. He is a 21st century Republican candidate. Those are my words, not his. He is someone that appeals to the broader electorate, not just conservative Republicans. He is a fiscal conservative. He is more moderate on social issues. And in an area like Los Angeles, where the electorate tends to be more socially liberal, it was very beneficial to him. He also had nonpartisan solutions for nonpartisan problems in a nonpartisan race where his party affiliation was not on the ballot. And so that helped to a degree. Certainly some knew he was Republican. We wanted the Republicans to know he was the only Republican in the race because that would ensure that 90% of them would swing his way. When we tested his message...
But did you want Democrats to know he was Republican?
Well, we knew we couldn't... He wasn't going to hide from the fact that he was a Republican, but he received support from Democrats and independents because he outperformed registration. If you look at the fact that he came in third place and was able to climb over top of Jan Perry, we greatly respect, but he was able to outperform, and there are a lot of things that contributed to that. Certainly, the fact that you had 8 candidates on the ballot, 7 were Democrats. They were splitting up, splintering some of the Democratic vote. But we know he got support from Democrats. The Westchester Democrats came out in big numbers for him. That was an area that was very concerned about the airport issue and the movement of the runway, and he was, he was different from everyone else on that particular issue. He came out and supported the community and said, we're going to vet this a little bit better than everyone else has suggested, and was the only one that was prepared to not just hop on board with moving the runway. He wanted to hear from the community first, very clear about that. That helped us in that particular area. And we also had a very robust voter contact program. We were knocking on doors and making phone calls, not just through our volunteer operation, but professionally. We did almost 500,000 phone calls and made about 30,000 contacts out of the headquarters. And we saw the areas that we targeted, particularly up in the north portions of the valley, where you have a Republican base. And you had, up in the north, you had almost double turnout in some of the council districts up there. And those are the areas that we worked the hardest. So Kevin had the right message. He appealed to people outside of the Republican Party because he also had other issues where he developed positions and got those issues out into the public. But we know his message worked because when we talked to voters that were undecided, more than 50% of them moved into Kevin's column. Kevin's only problem in this race was money. If we had just a little bit more money, he'd be in the runoff today. I'm quite certain of that.
Hey, Anita, very disappointing. You guys, obviously, you think you're going to win, but all the polls indicated from day one that you were in 5th place. And so the path to victory meant not only passing up Kevin James and Jan Perry, but Wendy Greuel and or Eric Garcetti. What was the strategy going in terms of trying to get to that position with such little amount of money and low name recognition?
I think the biggest focus for us was, of course, around engaging voters who are typically not as engaged, especially in municipal politics. And frankly, as the 16.1% of voters turning out, we did not necessarily do the best job at that, but there are a number of factors for sure that were involved. I believe that first and foremost, no offense to any of the candidates, but none of the candidates were terribly interesting. There was also not a lot of focus on issues and the policies that were coming out. And in spite of the fact that there were a number of candidates who had very strong policies framed and put up on their websites, there was very, very little discussion of that in the media. And inevitably, voter disengagement across the board. I mean, I would even argue around timing of the election, the fact that people started paying attention only in January because of the presidential election. I mean, we were trying to talk to people starting in June and July. We were on the ground really early and calling voters and knocking on doors, and more often than not, people were just not as interested in listening, much less sharing any of their concerns about what was going on in the city of LA.
But just like Jeff mentioned, you had voter contact where you were calling or knocking on doors and you would identify a voter, okay? Do you guys have data of the people that you identified at one point or another? How many of them actually came out? Even though you had communicated to them about your candidate, the date of the election, the turnout of people that you actually identified, what was that?
Well, as I said before, up in the northern parts of the San Fernando Valley, where we did, our most aggressive professional walk and phone call effort, we saw in one council district, we saw double turnout in early absentee returns. And we knew that was because we were knocking on doors in large numbers and also making
you don't have the actual numbers right now, but you could, right? Because you can go back and take a look at your data and see which ones that,
Well, sure, we have some numbers. Obviously, we have the initial numbers, and we want to see the rest of the 90,000 ballots counted.
Right.
I mean, the trends are there. The trends are hardened, but once the data, the complete data becomes fully available from the elections division, the city in about 4 to 5 weeks, and we'll do a complete analysis. But the trends show that where we did our most work was where Kevin did the best.
Yeah, Anita?
I'd argue the same. I mean, we've had a very strong focus in South LA and in East LA, and we did definitely see a number of folks turn out for that as well. We don't have exact numbers at this point, but inevitably when we were speaking to voters in the last week prior to Election Day, we had a number of folks already say that they absolutely did go out and vote absentee, or they were planning on going out with their entire family. And these are folks who had never voted before in a municipal election. So we definitely did see, I mean, anecdotally at this point, but we definitely saw quite a bit more turnout, again, with folks who had actually never participated in a municipal election.
Eric, Jan Perry, many of us expected her to really contest. I mean, there was scenarios where some people thought that she might be able to win. Obviously disappointing finishing fourth, but what could you have done differently to have pushed her to the second position?
Well, there's two things. I think when all the ballots are counted, we're going to finish third because of who are the last ballots, you know, who votes on Election Day. Those are going to break our way far more than Kevin's. So we'll finish a solid third. But regardless of that, I think our tracks 3.5 weeks out had us at second place.
You know what? I want you to finish third. Sorry about that, Jeff, because my exit poll says they finished third.
No, our track 3.5 weeks out had Eric at 27, Jan at 22, Wendy at 20, and Kevin at 6. You know, early on we did a very aggressive mail campaign, and I think we really, Kevin at 6.
6?
Yes, we really moved people. I think the problem was we were $1 million too short. Because if we had the money, if we had another $1 million to get on television for the last month, I think we had a definitive shot of finishing second. And frankly, if there wasn't DIE for Wendy to essentially out-communicate us by a factor of combined with their campaign 8-1, I think we would have been in the runoff.
So and I'm going to ask the three of you again, Eric, Anita, and Jeff, the debates.
Yes.
I think they were greatly helpful through the three of your candidates. And I would say, having seen many of the debates, either attended in person or what have you, that oftentimes when you asked people, I know the debate we had here at Loyola Marymount University, our students felt that Jan Perry won that debate and that Kevin was a close second, okay? And that Emmanuel did quite well. And so I think the debates gave your three candidates an opportunity. The problem, of course, there weren't enough people at those debates or being broadcast. What's your comment on that, Eric?
No, I mean, that's a very small audience. I mean, if I was to judge most of the debates, I think, frankly, I think Eric always does well at the debates because, you know, he's best prepared. He's an actor, for crying out loud. He always does well. I think...
Eric Garcetti.
Yeah, he's a SAG actor. You know, he's by far the best when it comes to being in front of an audience. I think Jan did best in authenticity. Kevin was good at certain times, and I think Wendy, frankly, underperformed in all the debates. But other than that, but I don't think the debates really shaped the election whatsoever.
Right. But they were still a way to get your name out in terms of in the press, the pictures. It helped.
Helped, but it was never going to be a decisive factor.
Yeah. So Jeff and Anita, just less series of questions. How did you guys prepare for those debates? How integral were they for your strategy?
Well, for Kevin, they were certainly helpful when they were live broadcast because that's when obviously he would get the most viewership, and those were opportunities for Kevin to leave lasting impressions with people. And you heard him break issues down very simply. You know, City Hall is broken. His opponents are City Hall, and they broke it. And that stuck with people because it was simple and it made sense because everyone knows City Hall is broken, right? So when he reminded people that it was broken and they broke it, and he was the alternative, and they could see that he had the qualifications to be mayor, it was very helpful. Preparing for those debates, Kevin, you know, has been preparing for debates throughout his whole career. He's a former federal prosecutor and radio broadcaster, and you know, his entire career he's debated many people, whether it was in the courtroom or on the airwaves, you know, with intelligence and in a very articulate manner. So this is a strength for him, and it served him very well. And you know, when it wasn't live broadcast and it was in places where viewership was small, it was an opportunity to continue to build up confidence in stakeholders. And I think that contributed to the fact that he was able to raise enough money to run a formidable race, which everyone argues.
How much money at the end of the day did he end up raising and spending?
Well, raising and spending, when you add in the super PAC.
Not the super PAC, just the James campaign.
Yeah, it was about around 800,000.
Okay.
And so, when you look at the 5 candidates that are represented on this stage, we had the cheapest cost per vote acquisition in the entire race, and we finished 3rd. So we're proud of that effort.
Anita, the debates, how important were they to your strategy? And also, how much did you end up raising and spending?
Well, I mean, the biggest piece was that we were not invited to a number of the debates because we had not reached matching funds early on.
We invited you here at LMU.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Thank you for that.
But actually, early on, I didn't want to invite him, but the students outvoted me.
Well, thank you, students. I really appreciate that, and I know Emmanuel does too. But early on, we were not invited because we had not hit matching funds, and you saw in the video the sign about letting Emmanuel debate. We hosted we had a protest at one of the debates, actually shut down national TV, which was very exciting. And we were able to raise close to $40,000, of which 80% was matchable right after that debate, to try to get into the next televised debate. But the debates in general were critical for a candidate whose name was certainly not well known in city politics. And it was also a format for him to really frame his policies and his strong ideas. We allowed Kevin to be the bulldog out there and to really sort of talk about other candidates.
I didn't think you needed to allow him. I think he naturally
He's going to do it anyway, right? So, but we said that's fine. Kevin can be that guy, and we didn't have to be that person, and we were more subtle in reminding folks that City Hall is broken, but came up with very key and critical solutions as to what we can do, or what Emmanuel can do to fix City Hall. In terms of the dollars raised, I think we raised by the end, close to about $750,000 total.
Okay.
With no special interest money or independent expenditures at all.
So Harvey, not Measure A, but I'm going to roll back the clock to about 6-7 months, and I'm going to hire you for one day to advise the Jan Perry campaign, then the next day to advise the Kevin James campaign, and then the following day to advise the Emmanuel Pleitez campaign, and I will pay you double your hourly rate. Okay? So what would you advise each one of these campaigns 4 or 5 months ago?
Well, Jan Perry, I would have advised to run for city controller. And I think
she would have gotten mad at you because every time anybody talked about that.
Right, and I think she would have won.
But she's running for mayor, so.
Well, she's running for mayor. I think the results that we saw last Tuesday are the results that I've been predicting, pretty close to the percentages.
Well, so have our surveys if you go all the way back. They were very consistent.
So again, if she's running, I'm a realist. And I'm not Don Quixote, and I don't suggest that my clients become Don Quixotes. So,
but you've run campaigns where the person finished 3rd or 4th.
Oh, absolutely. But I never believed there was a possibility of any of the other 3 candidates getting into the runoff. I've said for a long time that when people would ask me who's going to be the next mayor, I would say that their last name begins with G. And so that hasn't changed. So my advice would be run for
obviously there are
controller.
2 in the runoffs, but
okay.
Yeah.
So as for Kevin James, I thought he was an interesting candidate, but every election has what I'll call fringe candidates. And realistically, you may consider him a 21st century Republican, and on his views he may be. And to be honest with you, the views seem to just sound like what we used to call Rockefeller Republicans, but with a harder edge. Now is all that Mr. James seems to be, and Emmanuel I think has got an interesting future in terms of running for a city council seat. We have a history of people who want to start at the top, and generally when they do that they fail. There are a lot of people who are either extremely wealthy and they run for governor or senator and they fail, and they go back in California, names like William Matson Roth and Huffington, who went to Congress but then thought he could be U.S. Senator after 110, Al Checkey. There are very few Dick Reardons, but Dick Reardon had a terrific and substantial history of public service in the city. He didn't just rise up and write a check.
Right. So you're not going to give me a bit of advice that you think there was no path to victory for any of these three campaigns?
There was no path to victory for the mayor's race for any of those three campaigns.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, let me just say something about the hard edge.
No, he is right, because you did finish third, right?
That's right. Well, maybe. I don't know. That's debatable.
A distant third.
A distant third. I want to talk about the hard edge for just briefly, just for a second. You know, I think, you know, with all due respect, I think that Kevin is somebody who has a softer edge. He was chairman of AIDS Project Los Angeles, which is a $20 million agency that serves, you know, people who, at one time, an agency was preparing, you know, helping prepare people to die.
Okay, but wait a minute. Are you going to make the argument that he didn't have a hard edge during this campaign?
I don't think he had a hard edge. I think that he showed compassion towards people.
I think he did.
Cared for people
but he had the hardest edge during the whole campaign and the debates and all that.
I think he had a very defined message, and I think he showed contrast between those who have been running City Hall and wanted a promotion and someone who had an outsider perspective and had independence from the special interests. I think if you didn't have the DWP union weighing into this race so heavily, that you might have had a different outcome. I think you'd have seen more of a balance in the voter contact out there. Sure.
John, finished second.
I'm just taking notes.
Oh, yeah.
This is great.
You finished second, but does it really matter?
Well,
would you have preferred to have finished first? Will it change the strategy going forward that you're first or second?
Well, I'm not going to get too much into strategy, but
that's the only reason we invited
got
you.
Someone here who's paying attention. No, I understand. Let me just first say, Dr. Guerra, first of all, thank you for inviting us. And I want to congratulate the three people we've been talking to because they ran great campaigns. I know a little something about running these underdog campaigns. I've been involved with them. Some successful, some not successful. It's very, very difficult. When you're running a campaign, you don't have the resources, you don't have the name identification that the other candidates have. But sometimes you can find a way. Sometimes you can't. But they really ran excellent campaigns. With regard to Jeff and Kevin, real quickly, you know, I was involved in Dick Riordan's first campaign in 1993, a Republican running in a Democratic city, and later for Steve Cooley, a Republican running in a Democratic county against Democrats, respectively. They were successful. With Dick Riordan, it was easier. As Harvey mentioned, he had some history. He'd been on the Rec and Parks Commission. He had worked a lot in the city, but had the experience from outside the city, and also was a different time. It was shortly after the unrest of 1992, and people were looking for change, significant change. They were ready to come with somebody who was an outsider, truly an outsider at that time. In 2000, when Steve Cooley ran, and I know my colleague here was with Mr. Garcetti, Mr. Garcetti, the father of Eric Garcetti, who was a district attorney who had some challenges as DA, had some unpopular verdicts, and was vulnerable. So you had a vulnerable incumbent, and you had kind of the Steve Cooley guy who no one really knew, but had worked in the office for 30 years, 25 years at the time. And we were able to put a campaign together, even though we were outspent, we were able to be successful. But the times, to a very great extent, dictate your ability to be successful. We know now that every election cycle is different. One of the first questions we ask on polls is whether or not you think the city is headed in the right direction or if it's off on the wrong track. And that's also a very important determinant of whether you're going to run a campaign that's on change or whether you're going to run a campaign that's on sort of keeping things the way they are, moving in the right direction. This was a very interesting one. I'm not sure if everyone agrees with me on this, but it was kind of mixed. You know, 1993, we were heading in way bad direction. Crime was out of control, businesses were leaving, schools were failing, people wanted change. In 2001, when Mr. Hahn was elected, times were not so bad, and they wanted someone with experience, like a Jim Hahn. And so the Antonio Villaraigosa candidacy was less successful because people weren't ready for that kind of change. In 2005, I was running Bob Hertzberg's campaign. People were ready for change. There were a lot of challenges within the city. Pay to play was becoming a very big deal, and people were concerned about, you know, as Jeff was talking about, a corrupt environment, a broken system. And so Bob Hertzberg, our campaign, where we had less than...
What year was that?
That was 2005.
Right.
We ran a campaign with about $2 million or so, $2.1, $2.2 million. both Antonio Villaraigosa, who was elected that year, and Jim Hahn, who was the incumbent, had around 4 million, if I'm correct.
And what did Wendy spend this first time?
I think around five or so.
Right.
Tell me if I'm wrong, guys. So, you know, we didn't have as much money, and it was important. I thought it was really interesting. You guys watched the TV ads and some of the videos. You could see, I particularly enjoyed watching Jan Perry's, because I felt some connection to it. It was emotional. You got to tell her story. You could see her biography. I felt connected to her. And so it's difficult if you can't put that on television. It costs money to do it. And it's difficult through the mailbox, this sort of three-dimensional emotional story to tell, though I thought Eric did a good job doing that on the positive pieces. Didn't love the negative pieces, but I liked the positive pieces you were doing. But I'll just say that, you know, the times dictate the kind of campaign you run. And we know that in this election cycle, people were looking not for the pure outsider, like Kevin was, or the pure insider, which I'll argue that Eric is, but someone with a combination of experiences that has private sector experience, like Wendy, who's been worked in a small private mom and pop shop, worked at DreamWorks in the private sector, has had experience inside government with Tom Bradley, with the Clinton administration, ultimately as a city council member and a city controller. But those combination of experiences of having the inside ability to know how to get the job done, deliver results, but also having the perspective from the outside, which is, I think, ultimately a great advantage as we move into the runoff election.
So did the polling that when you started the campaign, did it ever change with Eric or Wendy not being 1-2?
No.
So you guys were always consistently 1-2?
Yes.
Yeah. This is purely hypothetical, but how different would the race have been had either County Supervisor Sev Yaroslavsky or developer Rick Caruso had run?
Well, it's difficult to speculate. Obviously, they bring two very different things to the table. Zev Yaroslavsky is an incredibly successful local elected official at the city level and at the county level. A very smart guy, very well respected, with a significant base that he can bring to the table. That would have been a challenge for us to have him in the race. Rick Caruso, another person who had a little bit of the Dick Reardon experiences. He's been inside government, he's served on commissions, but he's also been a private sector person, and has been extremely successful businessman, and also with a lot of resources he could have brought to the table. So there's no question that things could have changed, but I think that nonetheless I felt very strong about a message that Wendy had, and I think, you know, we're pleased to be in the runoff.
Bill, Carrick, Garcetti campaign, we talked about 16% turnout. Actually, when all the votes are counted, it'll probably be over 20%. But did you guys model how the results would be if it was 20%, 25%, and would it have made a difference in terms of Wendy coming in first or Eric?
Well, I think that we looked at our polling consistently showed if the electorate expanded, it was good for us. We did very well, as we saw in your exit poll. We did very well with younger voters, extremely well with younger voters. We did very well with Latino voters. We did well with voters who aren't typical municipal election voting bloc. So we felt very, very strongly if there was any possibility the electorate could expand, that would be good for us. Now the reality is you come out of the presidential race, voters are suffering from campaign fatigue. People get on the phone, they go knocking on doors, and people say, you got to be kidding me, there's another election? So you go through that all the way up until February. And then on top of this was a different race in terms of the post-Mayor Bradley era. What we had was candidates who really did not have defined coalitions that were attached to them. If you compare the last two competitive races, Hahn Villaraigosa, both of them had very strongly defined political definitions, were very clear. They were both, Jim Hahn is the heir to a political dynasty, and also had been city controller and city attorney. Antonio Villaraigosa had been a member of the assembly and speaker of the assembly, and then on the city council. They both had people who were instantly for them. I think this was much more amorphous situation. We started out with name ID advantages with the 3 members of the council who all had greater name ID than Anita's candidate or Jeff's, but it was soft. It was soft. It was not well defined. So I think that contributed to the low turnout, is that people didn't, the reflexive voter who doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about the election, they didn't really know who they were for because they didn't have any particular experience with these candidates.
And we asked the question, and we didn't show it here, but when did you decide to vote your decision? And we'll have that information on our website. Eric?
If I may say,
Yeah.
I think both of them are right. I think when you look at the right way, wrong way, which, John's right, it's the first question you ask, there's not only 2 Los Angeles.
But let's be clear about that. So we ask in surveys, and we asked that same question in our survey. We're trying to gauge how the citizens or the voters of LA feel about the city in general.
Yeah.
And then that helps determine what kind of a campaign, or at least how you're going to roll out your campaign. Go ahead, Eric.
One of the things that you learn very quickly is that there's not one LA, there's multiple LAs, and in fact, the sub-regions of Los Angeles have their own sub-regions. I mean, people talk about the San Fernando Valley. I would argue there are 3 San Fernando Valleys. There's the Latino San Fernando Valley. There's the West Valley, which is really traditional, what people think of the San Fernando Valley, and the East Valley, which has really nothing, looks a lot more like over the hill. So I think you had Los Angeles that is rising and a Los Angeles that is not rising. And it's also, the most interesting thing about those numbers is the most affluent parts of the city are the most unhappiest. And the least affluent parts of the city are the most optimistic about the direction of the city. So it's a strange juxtaposition. So it's very, very difficult to do. And frankly, one of the advantages of doing mail in a mayoral race in an audience that is so different in different parts of the city is it's a much better medium of telling your story, and breaking it up than television.
So, I mean, the consensus is, Eric, that you did a phenomenal job getting out early with the mailers. You guys started mailing a lot earlier than anybody else, and you micro-targeted. Talk to the students a little bit about that strategy.
Well, I mean, I don't think we did as much micro-targeting as people believe. I mean, we did a lot of split mailings as far as we went to the mail voters very strongly early on. We dropped, 7.5 weeks out. We dropped more than 3 million pieces of mail. And so I think most of our messaging was across the board. Some of it was regional. Many of our hits were regional, because I think Wendy had very specific vulnerabilities that I think we highlighted fairly successfully. And I think it's one of the reasons, frankly, she didn't finish first, given the turnout.
So you did such a great job that John Shallman and Bill Carrick have asked me for you to work for them. And so they would ask, what would your strategy be in terms of mailing? So if you were to work for the Garcetti campaign, what would you do going forward?
I think I would press the contradictions in Wendy's base. I think if you look at the 2 candidates, Eric's base. I mean, when we looked at all of our polling, there was never any question in my mind that Eric's going to make the runoff, because he had a coherent constituency that could not be separated from each other. Wendy's coalitions were very contradictory.
So explain that in terms of the coalition.
What I mean by that is, I mean, she is, I mean, and she's got, in Porter Ranch, she's Sarah Palin, and at SEIU, she's Rosa Luxemburg. And, it's really not very hard to push those contradictions.
I think our students know who Sarah Palin is. I don't know about Rosa Luxemburg, but.
So, I mean, part of it is to sort of tear apart her base of people that don't have much in common with each other.
But you have to be careful, because if you push that much, people get
is,
offended.
Obviously. But I think with Eric, I think one of the things, one of the most, in the polling, if you look at it, one of the things that people don't talk about, and we've seen countless news stories about the women's vote, the women's candidate. And I think one thing that Eric had consistently was an advantage with male voters. He even did well with Republican men. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of the untalked about things in municipal elections, is the advantage that male candidates have running for municipal offices, which I think is something that's going to come into play. And if I'm doing Eric's campaign, I would press on that.
So when you're talking about coalitions, both our data and then the LA Times ran some incredible GIS maps that were really, really nice. Although I think they try to infer too much in terms of some of their news stories, that they could have used our exit poll to make those comments. Like, you cannot infer what the Latino vote was from some of those. You know, it's just not, well. Anyway,
I think the Latino vote is frankly very fascinating, because if you look at, if I was a betting person, I think Wendy did well with Valley Latinos. I don't think they started well, but they closed well. They consolidate them with the very good endorsements that they have in the Valley. I think Eric always had the advantage with Latinos, and I think he maximized it and did a good job with that. And I think if you look at the map of South LA, I think Jan won South LA Latinos, because frankly, you wouldn't sweep that. South LA is so Latino right now that unless you do well with Latinos, you're not going to win every single precinct.
Okay, so let's follow up though. You're going now to work for the Greuel campaign. What would you do between now and the election in terms of mailers and your themes?
I think you need to run up. I think you need to find a base and run it up. I think you need to close the San Fernando Valley to Eric and not let him do anything there.
Okay, but how do you do that? I mean, it's easy to say that, but
I
then
think
how do you implement
I
that?
think you put your resources there to lock it down. I mean, I think when you look at a race like this, first you look at your vulnerabilities that you need to defend. First you defend, and they need to defend the valley, and then they need to move the fight into the west side. Forget about the east side. They're not going to make any headway there. Give or take, you know, some sub-constituencies that someone like Weezer can deliver to them. Eric's going to win 114 and 13. I can bet on that. The question would be by how much.
Okay.
It's a question. They need to hold their base. And one of the things that Eric did, if you look at the map, Eric is the only person in this race that actually won outside of his base. He won West LA. No other candidate actually won any region outside of their base. So you need to hold the valley and challenge and push him hard in the west side of Los Angeles.
Harvey, same questions.
By the way, I've never known anybody in our business who's not a betting man. So when Eric said, if I were a betting man.
Okay, so if you are a betting man, okay, what would you advise the Greuel campaign, and then what would you advise the Garcetti campaign, given what you've seen? Although you did lose 55-45, so I don't know whether they're going to take your
my advice is worth what you're all paying for it. Zero. I've had the privilege of talking to both of the candidates since Tuesday, and the one bit of advice that I gave them for free, obviously, and worth what I gave them, was it reminded me back in 1985, which is probably before many of you were born, or right about when you.
That's right. A typical freshman was born in 92, 93. Okay. So you are absolutely right.
And when I elected Mike Wu to the city council in the 13th council district.
I love how you just said that. When I elected Mike Wu.
That's right.
Were you the only vote?
I was the only vote. I was in our staff meetings. I was the only vote that mattered. And when we ran that campaign, we knew we'd be in a runoff against Peggy Stevenson, the incumbent councilwoman, and we hit very hard. We had to give lots of reasons for people not to vote for Peggy Stevenson. Knowing we'd be in a runoff, we had our focus groups ready to go the Friday after the election, so it would have been the equivalent of last Friday. And we showed all the mail. In those days, all we had was mail for city council races. There wasn't the cable TV inserts and things like that. We had mail and we had field operations. And what the people told us is, okay, we get why Peggy Stevenson needs to be replaced. We get all the reasons why Peggy needs to go. Now give us a reason to vote for Mike Wu. And I would start out with the philosophy of give Angelenos a reason to vote for you. Everything else is tactics after that. But what's the strategy? You know, strategy without tactics, or tactics without strategy, is the fastest road to defeat. And so I think, you know, and I would suggest that neither Mr. Carrick nor Mr. Shallman will tell you what their strategy is going to be, nor should they, and will not tell you a lot of the things that they would be saying, because we're a very secretive kind of a business.
Yeah, but you can kind of guess what their strategy is going to be. Take a guess.
Well, the rest.
I mean, you're John Shallman. What do you do besides get a haircut?
I can guess what their tactics are going to be, but I really don't know what their strategies are going to be. They're already out getting ready for their new focus groups, their new polling. They're testing new messages. Now it's a two-person race. And you know, these are two people who, if you look at their voting records when they served together in the city council, virtually identical. There isn't a lot of difference in a lot of the stands. So there's what you're talking about is a lot of approach will be the difference. I think, as Eric said, it's going to be defending the vulnerabilities, and every candidate has vulnerabilities, because as soon as the most popular day usually is the day you're sworn in. After that, it goes downhill from there, and so you've been in elective office, you're going to go downhill. So remember that, Mike. July 1 will come and go. But I think what we're going to see, and what we're hoping to see, I think, is, as people who care about the city, is we want to see some exchanges of ideas. And I think that as the strategies start becoming come together in the mail, and by the way, I think Eric's early mail was brilliant. I thought the mail was terrific. I thought the timing was excellent, and it's a great example in the 13th Council District where Eric
You're
also...
talking about Jan Perry's mail.
Well, but yeah, Jan
You said
Perry's
Eric,
mail.
but I didn't want the students to think Eric Garcetti.
No,
Yeah.
but...
Talking about Eric who ran Jan Perry's
Eric who ran
campaign.
Jan. But in the 13th Council District, as an example, and a couple of members of our staff live there, over the last 2 weeks, they walked in with 13 to 15 pieces of mail every day that arrived in their homes the last 2 weeks. So I think that, for the most part, mail the last 2 weeks, and I came to that conclusion a while ago in political campaigns, particularly in multi-candidate races, is wasted. I personally would only do 2 pieces of mail the last 2 weeks. I'm not going to tell you what they would be, but,
Yeah, but
in any
to
race.
defend Eric, though, he didn't have the money to go on TV, so you had to just
Well,
keep
when I said the early mail was brilliant, and I think that's really what boosted Jan Perry's campaign, was that early mail, because it was very targeted, it was very well done, and I think that went a long way, along with, by the way, I think the debates were very important for the 3 second-tier candidates. I don't think they would have done nearly as well had those debates, particularly the televised debates, not occurred, because the LA Times, the principal newspaper, really followed a lot of the debates and probably covered this mayor's race with fewer reporters than I've seen them cover races over the years.
Yeah, I have to, though, defend the LA Times. I think the last 2 weeks their coverage was pretty good. It was pretty extensive. They had at least 2 or 3 stories every single day. So let me ask you one more last question. If you're John Shallman or Wendy Greuel, are you worried about finishing second? My instinct is no, but...
No, look, the critical thing was to be within, 3 to 4 percentage points, which is probably where it will end up. Didn't really matter who's running. No one is crowing that Bill's not crowing that they came in first. John's not unhappy they came in second. Would they like it to have been reversed? Sure. I think everybody wants to come in first. It gives you that. But
interestingly enough, in 1993, Mike Wu came in first in the primary, and Reardon won. And then in 2001, Antonio Villaraigosa came in first by a lot.
Exactly.
And ended up losing.
Yeah, it's a different electorate to an extent on May 21st. So it really doesn't matter who came in first or second. The trick was come out, come into it, and be prepared to run the sprint. They've done the first part of the race, but now it's a sprint.
Anita, I don't know if this is the case, but is Emmanuel going to endorse either one of the candidates? And if he were, what would you advise him in terms of taking a look at? Not who to endorse, but what would be some of the questions that he should be asking the candidates about his endorsement? And what impact would his endorsement have?
Well, he is planning on endorsing one of the top 2 candidates. He's still figuring out exactly who. A few of the things that are, critical to Emmanuel in particular is just, they might be strategies or frankly tactics involved in the higher strategy of trying to involve communities, but really it would be the biggest thing for him, is to really understand which of the top 2 candidates would work within communities, community organizations, and really trying to build public-private partnerships, as well as, the tackling the budget issue of Los Angeles. Those are the 2 main concerns that he had as a candidate, the 2 main concerns that he really pushed out in his campaign. And I do think that those 2 issues are critical. And I think in terms of what he could offer either candidate is really looking at unusual ways of running a campaign. We were the most unique campaign. We had, young folks who were not necessarily always engaged in LA politics, but really pushing forward a different way of running a campaign.
Hey, Bill, I know you would want the 3 endorsements, but do they really matter? Can they deliver the votes?
Well, I don't think it's really a question of delivering. It's creating a comfort level for the voters who did not vote for you in the first race. It's certainly a validation that you are going to be for somebody that's very similar to the person you were for in the first race. So I think it does have value, and the endorsements of the other candidates has often played a role in LA mayoral politics. You know, not definitive. It's not the deciding issue, but I think it is important.
So Eric was talking earlier about bases, that Wendy has a base in the Valley, and certainly our exit polls show that. She clearly won the Valley. And she didn't have a, so it's kind of a little bit surprisingly, in terms of the female vote, she split that with Eric, but Jan picked up quite a bit of it.
We won by 2, not to be picky.
Okay, yes, but within the error margin. All right. There's a sense developing, and also Wendy did twice as well as Eric with the African American, even though Jan dominated that. We saw that she had way over 50%, but of the remaining, Wendy Greuel 2-to-1 against Eric. So if she can continue that, there seems to be a sense of a coalition of that Eric kind of alluded to, the Valley and African Americans, okay, kind of the 2001 Jimmy Hahn, and that Eric is doing kind of the west side, east side. Is that accurate?
Well, I think clearly the swing voters are going to be African Americans and Valley voters, particularly Republicans who voted for Kevin. I mean, those are going to be, I mean, that's the obvious thing. And neither, you know, Jan got in your exit poll 55% of the African American vote, which given where she started from in our polls, she really coalesced the African American vote, particularly in her council district 9, where she ran up really big numbers.
Right.
Of the 3 council candidates, Eric and Jan did extremely well in their own council districts. Wendy didn't do as well as them. And I think that's one of the things we saw was we did better in Wendy's base than she did in our base. Now, in terms of the getting those other voters, I think it's really going to be what kind of campaign you run. Can you communicate with people? How much time you spend there? I think certainly in South LA, my experience is that it's a very hands-on politics, and it's very heavily influenced by who people endorse. That's why I'm so close to Eric. But it's a very important dimension of this race is the votes that the 3 of them got. Where are they going?
Right.
And I don't know what you think, but the chances of this universe going to some 10% higher turnout, getting 30%, with a Reardon race was 34, 01 was 32, 33. I don't think we're going to get anywhere close to that. So we're basically going to see this same electorate come back again.
No, I mean, I think earlier on we talked about that in 2001 and 2005, there was a 5% increase in the turnout. So it went, and so if that were the case, then
there will be that.
It'd go from 20 to 25.
That would be reasonable.
In 93, I think it went from 34 to 45. That was an 11% increase. So, but I don't think it's that race. So, John, on May 21st, there's going to be obviously the mayor's race, city attorney, city controller, but also marijuana. Okay, does that change who comes out to vote, and who they vote or how they vote, what state of mind the voter is in? How do you factor in and there's 3 initiatives, and I teach this stuff, and I'm still confused about the 3 initiatives.
But you know, Wendy inhaled, according to her.
I saw a lot of nodding in this room when said how's that going to impact turnout. Let's talk about turnout for a second, then I'll get to the marijuana issues.
What do you think turnout's going to be on the 21st?
Well, you know, it's going to go up. I don't know to what extent it's going to go up, but the issue is 16%. That's pretty sad. And it's sad for a lot of
Yeah,
reasons.
but it's 20%. Okay, I've been
Okay,
doing
it's
this
20,
everywhere.
let's call it 22,
It's not
23.
16%. I mean, I know 20%
understand.
is not that much better, but I want to,
So once
I
all
love
the
LA.
ballots-
It was at least a fifth of us were awake.
Right, so once all the ballots are counted, we're looking at 20%. Whether or not it goes up to, I think, I agree with Bill, it's not going to get up to 30, 32. Could it get into the mid-20s? Possibly. The issue is that local politics are so interesting. We've worked, any of you who've volunteered for a presidential campaign, you know that ultimately your quality of life, when you walk out your door, your quality of your air, the purity of the water you drink, the safety of your streets, the quality of the education in the local school, that is local. That is going to be decided by the people who are in office at the mayor or in the school board. It's local issues. So really, your quality of life is directly impacted by who you elect mayor and city council and city attorney and these other races. These city elections matter. The problem is, a lot of people don't understand that. And so part of the challenge that we have in trying to get people motivated and have them shake off the fatigue that they just went through in terms of the 2012 presidential elections is to say these votes, the very few votes matter. And the smaller the number of votes there are, the more impact your individual vote is. So one thing that I know Wendy's going to spend a lot of time doing is going out, crisscrossing the city. We ran a campaign. We didn't hunker back in the valley. We didn't spend all our time in the valley. That was her base. She wanted to be a mayor for all of Los Angeles because she understands, as you talk to every part of Los Angeles, that people don't believe they're getting their fair share of services. They want to know when they pick up the phone to call 911, whether you're in Brentwood or you're in Boyle Heights or you're in South Los Angeles or you're in Sylmar, that people are going to, that paramedics or firefighters, police officers are going to respond in exactly the same amount of time, which is quick and efficient, save lives. It doesn't matter where you live, that matters. That you should be able to walk down the street and go to a good school. Those are local issues, they matter, and they matter in every part of Los Angeles. So we ran a campaign.
How does your campaign communicate that you guys care more about those issues than your opponent?
It's about being there. It's about history and experience. Wendy talks a lot about, her career coming up through Tom Bradley. When she was at UCLA, she had an opportunity to intern for Tom Bradley. I'm sorry, when she was in high school. And then later, after she graduated from UCLA, she went to work for Tom Bradley.
Hey, did you guys pay the LA Times to run that picture of her and Tom Bradley? That was probably one of the best ads for you guys. That was an awesome picture, by the way.
Well, the reality is it reflects a big part of who she is. Her mentor, the reason she's in public service, is because of a guy who was around before you guys were here, sadly, but his legacy lives on. A lot of the great diversity of Los Angeles, of some of the incredible programs, helping young people, and connecting government to local neighborhoods started with Tom Bradley. Wendy had the great opportunity in the 80s when crime was out of control, when there was, you may have heard of the Crips versus the Bloods and the gang violence and crack cocaine.
What gang did she belong to?
The Good Guy Gang.
Okay. Hey, so what do you think marijuana will do?
So, just to finish that point, I get it. Is the fact that, she did something as a young person, as you, I hope, will do, to get involved in your community to make a difference. In terms of marijuana, listen, it's an important issue. There's been so much confusion on this issue. We've had...
Hey, by the way, are any of you involved in any one of those? Okay, just to make sure. Okay.
Let's talk, without getting into... Right. Without getting into the, the actual arguments for or against, let's talk about the turnout, which I think is your question. There are people who consider this a very important issue, one of their most important issues, and they will turn out and vote.
Both for and against, don't you think?
I think for and against, certainly. So you will see some marginal increase in the turnout because that issue is on the ballot. To what extent that will have an impact ultimately on the mayor's race or any of the other races, it's just not clear yet.
Okay, Harvey, what impact did Measure A or Proposition A have on this election? I mean, number one, the only opposition that you had was the 5 candidates. they were all against your measure. Okay, and then
The
the
only
LA
opposition.
Yeah, and the LA Times. Well, but they didn't.
Daily News.
They would mention it in the debates that they were against it when
Absolutely,
asked. But they never. I never really saw them go out of their way saying I'm against Proposition A unless they were asked.
We never saw that LA Times photographer's picture from behind where they all had their fingers crossed when they said vote no on Proposition A. Did it have an impact on the election? Not at all.
Okay.
It didn't have an impact on turnout. It didn't have an impact on anything having to do with the election. It was totally separate, in my view.
Okay, why did you lose?
More people voted no than yes.
Then why did more people vote? I mean, you outspent the opposition.
We outspent the opposition.
How much did you raise?
$1.5 million to zero.
Right. So the opposition spent zero. He spent $1.5 million.
Right. Absolutely. And our research had always shown that we needed a 25% voter turnout to win. So when we saw what voter turnout was, we knew, and over the last 10 days of the election.
That's because in our exit poll and then also some of the LA Times analysis, it shows that more Latino, more African American, poorer, they voted to a greater degree. They voted in favor in many cases for Measure A.
We needed a 25% voter turnout to win. We obviously didn't get that. The campaign, even though we raised $1.5 million, $700,000 of that was in the last 2 weeks. So we really missed all of the absentees for the most part. We were able to get some mail out and some calls out to absentees. Our original campaign plan had 3 weeks of TV. We ended up doing a week. So we weren't able to communicate our message well, and then there was a piling on when all the candidates for mayor, all the candidates for city controller, all the candidates for city attorney, some courageous candidates for city council did the right thing, and some courageous council members. But it was not, there was a lot of special interests in Los Angeles that were upset with Proposition A. They said it was put together at the last minute. Well, all the tax plans that were being considered were put together at the last minute, whether it was a bond measure for parks, whether it was the sales tax, whatever. And it's sort of insider baseball. The fact is all of these options were in the report that Miguel Santana presented to the city council 6 months earlier. But some members of the council chose to focus on some items, not the other, so it wasn't a new issue. But when you have this voter turnout, there is no chance of having a tax measure win. I mean, it's flat out simple.
Yeah, Jeff? I mean, I think Measure A helped your candidate the most in terms of rallying against it, is my sense. I don't have data for that, but that's just my sense.
Well, certainly. I mean, to add to what Harvey had to say, the reason it didn't pass is because the people who showed up to vote are the most impassioned voters and are high-propensity voters. They're most passionate about issues. And none of them wanted their taxes to go up any more than they already have. So it was pretty simple for them. And I think for people who understood it a little bit further than that, knew that there was this reputation of these tax measures keep coming to them on the ballot to pay for things that the city council and the city government is unwilling to cut because their campaigns are funded by special interest groups that benefit from that. So I think that's pretty simple in the minds of the voters who did show up and are unhappy with the way things are going. No doubt it helped Kevin. Kevin signed the ballot opposition argument, as did Jan Perry, and they were the only two to do so in the mayor's race. And so they did a little bit more, I think, a lot more than just talk about it when they were asked about it. They were very proactive about saying why we shouldn't raise the sales tax. We should instead go, responsibly reduce the budget.
What is your guess if we were to take all the people who voted for Kevin and how they're going to vote on the 21st? How do you think their split would be in terms of what percent would end up voting for the controller and what percent would end up voting for the councilman? It's a guess, but what do you think?
Well, I think it's difficult to answer that question. I think it really depends on how credible the councilman and the controller's message is to those voters. They're going to have to work very hard to communicate with those voters about why the voters should go back to the polls in May and vote for one of them. Obviously, if Kevin James decides to endorse in this race, that will be very helpful because he will be a spokesperson. If he chooses to do that, and he's met with Controller Greuel and Councilman Garcetti, and has laid out the criteria that's important to him. If he's going to consider such endorsement, he has not made a decision. Eric and John and everyone up here, we've all been talking about the geography of the city. I think you're going to see different behavior patterns in different parts of the city. And so in some areas, Eric's going to have to go up into the valley and work the Republican base up there. I think he can do that. I don't think it's, I don't think that the race is over up in the valley. I think that Republican voters are ready to be, shown who they should really vote for, because they're going to, the people who voted in the primary are going to show up and vote. I mean, statistics show that. You see that. So, but they want to know who to vote for, and I don't think that either one of them has made the case yet.
Yeah. Hey, Anita, the women's vote and the women's issue, I sense more excitement outside the city about Wendy's historic candidacy in terms of being a woman than in the city. But I actually think that's a good reflection of the city. I think either John or Eric have mentioned about how the city's almost, that there's no greatly defined group supporting that women are willing to consider women, Latinos, African American, or white candidates. But do you think there'll be more of a woman vote for Wendy in the runoff than what we saw in the primary?
Well, I mean, I have to agree with Jeff on what exactly the message is to those women in terms of what is more in what the women of LA
but just symbolically, the fact that she's a female, I mean, first of all, she's the first female ever to make a runoff in the mayoral race, right? Mm-hmm. So she's very close. Just the fact that she stands up there and you see she's a woman, symbolically, that's pretty powerful. I don't think she has to say more than that in some respects.
I don't disagree with that, and I do, however, I really think that the fact that the women's vote has been, in essence, split is really back to strategy and back to messaging. I mean, if it was simply the fact that she was a woman, or the fact that Jan Perry and Wendy Greuel were both running, I mean, you would have expected both of them to split the women's vote just for the sake of them being women. So I personally don't, I really do agree that it has to be down to the message of what is of concern. And going back to, I don't remember if it was Eric who said this or not, but around the fact that LA is as diverse as it is, and every single area of LA is concerned about something very different. And while it's extremely difficult to micro message to all the different areas, I think that it's going to be extremely relevant. So I will not make a prediction of any sort around the fact that women will turn out specifically just for Wendy.
Sure, I've worked for a lot of women over the years, women candidates and electeds, Carly Fiorina, Supervisor Bates in Orange County, State Assemblywoman with Melissa Melendez in the Inland Empire. And Melissa, I'll tell you, she was running against a man, and she had an advantage as a woman. And I'm sure that, I know that Eric's campaign knows that they may have to address the gender gap at some point, and they'll look at that in their polling. But if he has a strong women's coalition supporting his campaign, and people that are respected in the community that are women leaders, he can close that gender gap very quickly. In fact, he could surpass it with the right message.
So, John, so is there going to be a special strategy or message for women? Because I think one of the incredible things is that Jan Perry right now is the only woman on the city council. She's termed out, okay? In a sense, given who's already won and who's in the runoffs, it's a guarantee that of the 15 council members, 13 will be male. Then we have the 9th district where it's Ana Cubas against Curran Price, and then we have the 6th, which is vacant and gonna have a special election. But there's gotta be something where we've gotta say, there's gotta be women in elected office in LA. If Wendy loses, there's a possibility there'll be no women in elected office in the city of Los Angeles. You got to be able to communicate that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it's an extraordinary situation where we are with the city council right now, where at one time, Mike, you can help me on this, how many women we had at one point, but
I think the high point was 5.
5,
yeah.
And to potentially, so 1/3 of the city council, even though women represent more than half of the population of Los Angeles. To be in a situation where you only have 1/3 is problematic, but to have none is extraordinary. Listen, Wendy, I think Barbara Boxer said it best when she endorsed Wendy Greuel. She said she is the most qualified candidate for mayor ever who happens to be a woman. She's not running, don't elect me because I'm a woman, elect me because I'm qualified and it can solve the problems of the city. But there's another issue here too. I have 2 daughters, and they're excited about the prospects that there could be a woman mayor. You know, they may not care as much about some of the details of solving the city's problems, but they do like the idea that we could have a woman mayor. It's about time, but it's not the reason why Wendy's running. It's not the reason she got into this. But it is an issue that I think will appeal to some people. But I got to be honest with you, Dr. Guerra. I've heard a lot of men who've said that having a woman as a mayor would be refreshing and would be a change and would be nice. And so I don't think that it falls on gender necessarily. I think it's the notion of having someone different who has a new perspective that can make LA a successful city, the kind of city, world city we want.
So let's open it up to any students who might want to ask a question. You can come up here and we'll give you a mic and possibly extra credit. But in the meantime, let me ask one more question. But you guys, whoever is thinking about asking a question, and given the midterm results, I would encourage many of you. So let me ask a couple of.
Ouch.
Let me ask. We talk about the budget having a structural deficit, and we'll get to public policy in a second. But is there a structural problem with municipal elections that we're just not going to get a high turnout? Yeah, and so let's go down. And just to remind students, turnout was 20%, but the last election in 09, it was also about 18%, but it wasn't competitive. Nobody was running against Villaraigosa. Then it was in the high 20s, low 30s in 2001, 2005, 45% in 1993. But I'll also remind the students that in 1969, 76% of LA voters came out to vote for mayor. And then in 73, it was 65%.
Well, I think that's a very important topic, and I believe that in the next couple of weeks, you're going to see a commission form in the city of Los Angeles to discuss just those issues.
Okay, what would you recommend to that commission?
Pretty broad ranging. Well, you know, I looked at the results, and first of all, in my view, and I may be wrong, and Bill and John may have more information on this, I believe that about 20% of the voter file is dead weight. We haven't had a negative purge in California, the voter files, since 1972.
So you mean that there's 1.8 million registered voters, and you think about 300,000 of those
are
either they've moved,
dead, or they've moved, or they're double registered, and I think that's probably a conservative number. So I think actually more people. I think a bigger problem, the fact we only have 1.8 million registered voters. With how many people do we have in the city of Los Angeles?
Well, but we have 4 million, and a good portion are under 18, a good portion are non-citizens.
I think we've got to look at the issues of is this the right time to be holding elections? Is a March primary and a May runoff really an appropriate time to vet the issues? The fact that we walk out of a presidential race and walk into a mayor's race.
What you're doing is listing the problems. What do you think? Are they going to be, do you have a suggestion for this
commission?
Well, if you were before that commission and they asked you, what do you recommend that we change?
I would like to look at a June, November, even year elections in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay. Now, the argument against that is that would happen during either the presidential or gubernatorial election,
Correct.
And then you would have on the ballot president, U.S. Senate, Congress, supervisor, county assessor, whatever. You would have to, and then all the propositions, you would be on page 4 of the ballot.
I ran an independent expenditure campaign in the city of Santa Monica this past November, and for some city council candidates, and a presidential election. Their elections are November, even numbered years. The voter drop-off was much less than you would expect. It was about 17% from the top of the ticket.
But it's not only the drop-off, but who would be paying attention? I mean, we'd all be...
You would be surprised. You know, I believe one of the reasons voter turnout was so great in Mike Bonin's election is because he turned the vote out. I believe voter turnout, I think the ideas and the creative juices and all that are at the top of the ticket, but getting the vote out is a bottom of the ticket item. And I think that it will actually increase voter turnout.
Anita, you're before this commission to take a look at elections. Do you like the elections the way they are, or would you recommend some changes?
I definitely would recommend changes. I also am in favor of June, November elections, but off year from the presidential elections. I think that to get the proper weight for people to actually pay attention to what issues are important in local elections is important to have outside of presidential elections.
John?
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think that, I believe at one point the primaries were in April.
Correct.
And they moved them back to March. And quite frankly, after a November election, you move into holidays. So literally on January 1, when people are back from holidays and vacations, you're hitting the ground and you have to, it's a sprint. It's just not enough time to be able to get enough voters to realize there's a new race and there's new people and new issues to talk about. So I like the idea of an odd year, June to November. It gives plenty of time for people to get past the fatigue of November in the even year and start really focusing by June, and then have plenty of time in between that period to analyze the two candidates.
Eric?
Yeah, I think as a I mean, I would never move it to a presidential year because I think what you're going to do is you're going to raise the entry fee of people who can run. One of the advantages of having these off-year elections is ordinary people can raise $100,000, get it matched, and if they have a local following, like Joe Buscaino did, they have a chance to win. I don't know if Joe Buscaino wins in the November of 2012. So I think obviously the turnout is terrible, but I think partially it's easy to blame the voters. But I mean, part of it is it's a structural failing if people aren't interested. We're not offering things. The structure itself does not lead for people being interested. It's very easy to blame the voters. I mean, I read the Steve Lopez thing where it's just lashing out at the voters. Well, isn't it a failing of all of us, of the entire political system, that they're not interested? So it's easy to do that.
Bill?
I'm definitely against doing it on the even year cycle. I think the odd year cycle is much better. We went through all these debates in the primary. They were in individual communities, many of them. They brought up local issues. There was a lot of interest in them. I think we'd lose all of that. We wouldn't have anywhere near the interaction with the voters that we had. Now, obviously the voters can make their own choice about whether they're going to vote or not. But the reality is if we had an even year, it would get buried in the other campaigns.
Jeff? And then we'll take a question.
Yeah, I agree with Eric and Bill. I think that maintaining an off-year election is important, so there is focus on it. And I think it is incumbent upon campaigns to draw voters out.
Anita and John, though, but doing a June,
I think
November.
I think I agree with the June election because I agree with what John said. You know, Kevin had, you know, to get through the malaise of, you know, Mitt Romney losing and the Republican donor base didn't want to write any checks around Christmas time. And by the time you get people interested in contributing to the campaign so you can fund voter contact, it's like February 1st and you're already missing the absentee ballots. And also, it changes the focus for the media. The media wasn't worried about presidential candidates coming to town or in other parts of LA. They had, you know, a pretty good focus on the candidates running for mayor, so that if you didn't have the, you know, $10 million that were spent in some campaigns, you could get your message out through earned media, and that played heavily for candidates to be able to get their message out.
We at one point counted up 19 LA Times reporters who were covering the campaign in some capacity or another. That would not happen in a presidential cycle because those very same people were in Ohio and Florida and other places covering the presidential campaign.
I want to get to the students, so a yes-no question starting with you, Bill. Yes or no? Are you in favor of the instant runoff election like they have in Oakland and San Francisco for Los Angeles?
No, I think it's been a terrible.
Eric?
No.
John?
Absolutely not.
Nita?
I'm from San Francisco, so yes.
Harvey?
No. No.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lauren Ewell. Thank you for coming tonight. My question relates to the marijuana issue. Could candidates use that as a focal point to target younger voters, perhaps drawing them out to the voting booths without alienating older voters who cast more ballots? And has this been something you've ever discussed? And what would be pros and cons of doing so?
Jeff, so if your candidate was still in, and you were in May, and marijuana's there, how would you strategize for your candidate in terms of the marijuana issue?
Well, I don't know how many young people have glaucoma, but Kevin likes to say. You know, I think that the best way, regardless of age, and maybe there's an element of reaching younger voters this way, but I think that the best way to communicate with folks that are using medical marijuana is through the dispensaries where they're collecting. And so I would find ways to campaign through those.
But you think well, we've seen we saw Colorado in November, even in California. Every time we've had a marijuana issue, we have seen an increase from young voters. So you think this is going to manifest itself on the 21st?
I think I think it's not so much about the age as it is the people that are utilizing the product. And if you go to where they're purchasing it, I think you can reach them with a message. And I think that in turn would result in more younger voters maybe taking a look at that candidate. So I think that's how you reach them, because that's my job. That's our job, is how do you reach voters, right? And we have to find different ways to reach voters, even more so now because of the thicket of information flowing into people's homes and computers and everything. So I think it's a tool, sure.
Bill and John, have your campaign started to discuss this and develop strategies? We won't ask you what the strategy is, but have you started talking about the fact that you do have these initiatives on the ballot? Bill?
Well, we've talked about having these initiatives on the ballot. We haven't really thought about it in a strategic sense and are using it somehow in the campaign.
But will it have an impact?
I think it's possibly going to have an impact. It is medical marijuana. We're not legalizing recreational use of marijuana. And it is how we regulate where the dispensaries are and how many they are. So this is going to have a broader-based appeal than just let's light up a doobie. I mean, this is going to be... This is a serious issue. Our mutual friend and Mike's mentor, Bill Rosendahl, is now using medical marijuana just to help him keep food down. I mean, it's a very serious issue, and we obviously don't want to get rid of medical marijuana as an option for people who need it. So that's what this is about, how to make it regulated in a sensible way.
John, your campaign's starting to talk about what role it's going to play?
Well, we've talked about it. I totally agree with what Bill just said. But the fact is that Eric and Wendy have the same position on the issue. And where initiatives really take hold in terms of defining a race with two candidates is when they have different positions. That's not the case here. Obviously, we're hopeful that turnout goes up, but it's an important issue, and obviously there's some strong solutions on the ballot for voters to look at.
Kenneth?
Hello, my name is Kenneth Chansey. I'm a sophomore here.
You running for something?
Oh, I will be in 2017.
Okay.
That's later. My question, I wanted to say that I believe that this whole election this year was built around the city's finance and the budget deficit. And it started out saying that the budget was very critical and needed help. And then last week you had Antonio Villaraigosa come out and say that the budget shortfall wasn't as critical as it was initially thought. Do you think that this is the reason why initiatives like Prop A have failed, and why they'll continue to fail in Los Angeles?
It takes a student to ask the best question so far. So you were running Measure A. I mean, were they lying to us until the end?
I don't believe they were, and I think that I think everybody who has ever worked with Miguel Santana as the CAO of the city understands that he gives accurate numbers. We all know, you just look around, that the economy has certainly had an uptick, and that means that there's an increase.
No, but everybody, I don't think I would disagree with the numbers, but
there's
they knew a
always-
week
there is
before the
cynicism.
election, though, that they had new numbers.
About a week before they knew.
And we weren't told until after the election.
And we're not told until, well, actually, that's not exactly true, because
Not
on
exactly
March
true.
1st,
You sound like you were trained by a Jesuit. It's like...
but by a good rabbi, actually.
Okay,
And
same
there was the
thing.
rabbis who trained the
Yeah.
Jesuits, I believe. On March 1st of every year, the CAO issues revenue forecasts and other reports. So the information was available prior to the election.
If you looked hard for it.
Well, the LA Times got a ton of reporters covering City Hall, or not a ton, but half a ton. They used to have a ton. And there was some stories about it. So yeah, on March 1st, prior to the election, and word of that did get out, that the revenue forecasts were higher. That doesn't change, by the way, the long-term forecast. Interestingly enough, no one has disputed the fact that it may only be $100 million, only $100 million deficit this coming fiscal year, but what does it mean for the next fiscal year? And I think you're still going to see a freeze in the hiring of police. Now, that doesn't mean layoffs, but what that means is the fact that about 300 LAPD officers retire or resign every year. So you are going to have some decreases in that, just through attrition. And if you have a hiring freeze, then that will occur. But I think as we're talking a long-term structural, forget what the reasons, forget public employee pensions, forget the salary raises, you have to deal with what is, okay? And you have to look, this year we'll skate to only a $100 million deficit rather than a $212 million deficit. But next year it may be 100, and with the economy getting better, with real estate transfer taxes going up, with sales taxes just naturally going up because more people are buying things, it may only be a $150 million structural deficit. But these deficits will continue because there's been a tremendous amount of cutting. Can you cut more? You can always cut more.
Okay, let's get another, I hate to cut you off because you can always cut more, but go ahead, Andrew.
Hi there, my name is Andrew Matthews. I have a question specifically for Miss Anita Dharapuram. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And I'm sorry, in the Pleitez campaign, Dr. Guerra has been quoted in the last couple of months saying that Emmanuel Pleitez had absolutely no chance of winning. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything like that.
No,
but
thank you for making my accurate prediction.
And saying that he only had 2% of the vote.
No, he had more than that.
Mr.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
4.
Yeah, he had twice as much as you gave him.
4%. Well, 3 times as much as you gave him.
Okay.
But did...
wait a minute. Where's my grade sheet? Go ahead,
but
Andrew.
Did Mr. Pleitez really think that he had a shot, or was this really just a chance to get his name out there get his name, for possible future endeavors that he might pursue?
That's a great question. I think it's a combination of things. I think the bottom line is, and I'm going to sound like I'm political speaking here at this point, but I really do believe that Emmanuel Pleitez is, a product of Los Angeles, and he really believes that there needs to be more done in this city, and that's really what he's been fighting for. So in the short term, yeah, you're right. I mean, he was a total long shot in this. It was not as if we were expecting 32% of whatever turnout was going to come out. I mean, they were just not really pretending that that was going to happen when we were looking at our strategy. We were definitely looking at trying to open up the avenues for different new thinking. I mean, we have a number of candidates who have been in the city for over a decade, over 30 years combined, right? So what can be new and what can be different in this city? And frankly, I think that he provided a lot of that fresh thought and fresh thinking. So in the short term, yes, okay, he was not going to win. He did get, 3 times what you predicted,
Yes.
Dr. Guerra? Okay. But at the same time, for the long term, if nothing else, these ideas are out there, his policy concepts, plans, ideas that could be taken up by any of the other 2 candidates to really take advantage of, I think is a long-term goal of him as a human being and as a product of LA. He really is a community organizer at heart and it's not about personal name recognition and high future in politics. It's really about what does the city need and what is the city, how can he help the city of LA?
Now, while I predicted he wasn't going to win, I did encourage him to run. I did think he should run. So one last question. What would you wish you did differently? Or another way of saying this, and we'll go down the line for all your campaigns, what mistakes did you make? Not the candidate, but you as a campaign manager.
Well, in a campaign like Kevin's, we had limited resources, and we were spread thin as a staff, and we were, working as hard as we could to run a campaign as close to the size of some of our opponents with very little reasons.
That sounds like an excuse, but go ahead.
But to answer your question, to the point, what I would do differently is I would find a much more robust way to raise money for Kevin, because when we did talk to voters and his message was out there, it moved voters, large numbers of voters into his column. So the thing that I learned from this race was we have to find new ways to get Kevin's donor base, which is the Republican donor base, interested in investing in LA and California again. And that's something that we're looking at because he was a formidable candidate. He showed stronger than I think most people thought he would.
Harvey, what would you do differently? What mistakes did you make?
Probably scads of mistakes, but there's nothing I could do differently with the resources and the timing.
Anita?
We're in the same camp as Kevin James, inevitably, we did not have the funds to compete with respect to media buys, mailers, et cetera. So we were trying a very creative approach with email, Facebook, Twitter, just pushing out the vote that, or the information that way, as opposed to traditional campaign avenues. I do think that getting out earlier, joining, I mean, we started close to a year, if not more than a year after many of the candidates entered the field. So we had a really short time frame as well to not only raise the money, but to help with voter turnout, voter recognition, or name recognition. So it's definitely, sadly, I think it's money related. We would not have been able to compete. We did not compete. We could have tried to compete if we had gotten a lot more of the funding.
So, John, what would you do differently during this primary campaign?
I don't know that we would. I feel really proud of the campaign we ran. We ended up where we are. We get a chance to move on, and I think Wendy did an extraordinary job leading our team, and we're just very proud of it.
Okay. Eric?
Well, I'm sure we made mistakes, but I think fundamentally, even though we didn't get there, I think we did as good as you can with the money that we have, and we really stretched the race and made her very, very competitive. But I'm sure we made mistakes, otherwise we would be in the runoff. But I can't think of a major one, to be honest with you.
Bill?
I would have liked to have gotten started faster on the field operations, maybe less phone banking, more door knocking, and built a little bit more infrastructure for the runoff.
One last question. I'm not going to ask Bill or John, but I'm going to start with Eric. Given what you know now, who's going to win in May?
I think Eric has a slight advantage.
Anita?
I abstain.
Harvey?
Next mayor's last name begins with G.
Jeff?
The next mayor may be a man or a woman.
You guys, I give an A to Eric for his performance here. So, hey, let's give them a nice Loyola Marymount thank you. See you guys next week.